Okay. Anybody that's watching, that's just tuning in, we're just testing at the moment, making sure everything is working and that we are ready for you guys at 8 o'clock. The the show will still start at 8 o'clock and will take place and it will test. It will run at 8 o'clock. We're just testing and making sure everything's working, so you can still tune in at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I've got the change of the feed. It's now on the Transpaviance Facebook
Okay.
page.
So it's showing on your side on Transpaviance. That's perfect. Harold, just as I get messages through on my system, are you hearing the ping sound through the speakers at all?
Not really, no.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I just wanted to check that.
Delay is quite minimal.
Okay. Just give us a thumbs up in the comments if you can hear us and see us and everything's working on your sides. That would be great. We've got about 6 minutes to the actual show starting. Great. Thank you for that, guys. I'm getting WhatsApp messages through saying that we've only got 3 hours left to buy pineapples for brewing our own beer. So yeah, 5 minutes to the show. If you just joined us, we're going to be going live at 8 o'clock, although we're live already, just testing and making sure everything's working. But at 8 o'clock, the show will start. We're going through the training planners with Harold from Polar, in depth looking at that. I hope that some of you guys have downloaded that already from our website and ready with your questions. We're going to go and try and answer as many of those. And we will try and be as quick as possible so that you can watch Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, our dear president, live tonight, still chatting to us. Luckily for us, we know he's got a bit of a reputation not to be on time. So I think we will be okay. We should be able to run through our entire show before he comes on. And yeah, if you guys are, if somebody sees him coming on while we're still busy, prompt us in the comments. It would be great to know that he is on and that we are losing viewers because of him. I think Harold, you said you had him on speed dial. Why didn't you get him to join on our Trans Talk rather, instead of doing a live nation address?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Eh?
You've used up all your...
Yeah, I've used up all my credits. No more credits that side. Yeah, we should be done. I think obviously he's got important information to share. We haven't heard from him in a while. But he always seems to pick Wednesday nights at around 8 o'clock. If I recall, 2 weeks ago, similar thing was done.
Was it Wednesday or was it a Thursday?
No, it was a Wednesday 2 weeks ago. I remember the first episode of
Yes,
Trans Talks, yeah.
he had also had a thing then. That's correct. Okay, we've got about 2 minutes to the show starting, guys. We will start at 8 o'clock promptly to make sure everybody has joined in that wants to join in.
How's the voting going on the plants?
Yeah, there was quite a couple of votes in when I checked last, and I seem to think that BAC was, I don't exactly know how to announce that yet or name that, if it's BAC or BAC or what it is, but it seems that that was in the lead at that stage. So
okay.
I'll double check now. What the status is on that.
The delay is really minimal. It's good.
Okay, perfect. So we don't have that big delay from last week, which will help a lot for this evening show. Okay, I think the clock's at 8 o'clock. Let's start with our little intro. Okay, so we've already had our first mistake and we started at 8 o'clock at least. That was the video that was supposed to be playing a bit later. But we are live and everything else seems to be working. I hope that video did play a bit and you got a bit of a brief from it as to what we will show you a bit later. Welcome to tonight's Trans Talk. We are going to go on episode 3 and we are going into the training planners into quite a bit of detail with Harold Zampt from Polar, and he is going to go through it with you guys, explain it. It's available on our website to download. It's a simple Excel spreadsheet, and you are welcome to do it while you're watching as well, and play with it while Harold prompts you and gives you ideas of how to work on it. And we'll definitely engage on that. We also announcing the final winners of the hill naming tonight with their prizes that they will be receiving. And also you'll stand a chance to win a Polar Grid X once again, a unique link for this week, and for you to sign up onto. And it will only be open until 10 o'clock tonight. So hopefully you'll be able to still fill it in after Mr. Ramaphosa has spoken to us as well. So yeah, we are live, and I'm going to dig right into it. Harold Zandt, he is on the other line. We are using Zoom tonight, and we're hoping that it's working much better for you guys. Harold, as like I've mentioned before in the other episodes, has ridden the very first Trans Pavillons in 2004, and has since done numerous races, a lot of experience in this race specifically, but also a lot of experience in the field that he specializes in. And that is also a lot linked to training and how you guys can train for the Trans and get ready to climb the MAC. So yeah, I'm going to give over to you, Harold. You can go for it.
Thanks, Zane. And evening, everybody. Apparently, we are the opening act for another act later on. So let's see how we can do, and let's see, hopefully we can share some valuable information with you guys this evening. First thing I need to do is share my screen. Just give me a second to do that. And we should have a screen share going up now. So the whole idea behind tonight's little presentation and discussion is really just to look at training and to look at really some guidelines to help you with your training. We know the race, whether it's going to happen in August or January next year, is still open. And but I think what I'd like to share tonight is really just some information, some basic training guidelines. And one of the big things to understand about training, it's almost like nutrition. One recipe doesn't work for everybody. You've got to find out what works for you. Obviously, there are certain guidelines you would like to stick to that have been proven over the years to work. But they are guidelines. They are just that. You still have to find your own recipe to success. So there's a little bit of work involved in that, but hopefully we can share some of those guidelines. But first, I'd like to actually just share a quotation with you guys, which is actually from a very well-known sports scientist out there, Oscar Jurkendrup. I think he is predominantly active at the moment in the UK. But his quote goes along the lines of athletes measure a lot of things, but what really matters is what you do with that information. And we all know, you know, the saying goes, if it's not on Strava, it was never done. You have to prove everything you do. But I think there's also risk in that, having too much information on hand and possibly some information that may not always be that valuable. Brett Sutton, for example, he's one of the top triathlon coaches in the world. He actually says that wearable technology is the greatest addiction amongst triathletes. So I think one needs to get an understanding of what you are actually looking for, what you are trying to really basic concepts of what we are trying to achieve in training. And it comes back to preparing for an event. We've called it the classic training model. You can look this up in most training books out there and most manuals out there. And what the training model is really about is this need to build up your performance steadily to race day, so that you want to apply your training in such a manner that you progressively get stronger and peak on race day or an event that you're training towards. Some of us might not even be training for events particularly, but just for other objectives. But we're trying to get the best possible performance out of ourselves. The first thing we actually need to look at is something called training load. Now, to get the performance to increase over time, your training load has to increase. And really what the training load is made up of, first of all, is training volume. So you have your training frequency and your training duration. Now, training frequency, very simply put, is how often you train. And I've actually highlighted it in red here because it's probably one of the most important things in any type of training is frequency, and coupled to that, your training consistency. The next thing that makes up the training volume is your training time. Very easy to measure that with a stopwatch. And what you'll see in this classic training model as you're building up to an event is the steady increase in training volume. But you'll notice there's a part where it peaks and then the training volume starts dropping off. And that'll become a little bit clearer just now why that is the case. And specifically why we have these various phases or these names for these various phases in training. The base phase, you guys are all familiar with that. You steadily build up the volume, and then you get to this transition phase. So without further ado, let's have a look at why this is called a transition phase. And when we start bringing in the training intensity, it'll start making sense how we transition. After you've peaked your training volume, you transition, and then you start moving up the average weekly intensity of your training. So those three components really make up how you would get your training load to steadily increase. And you'll notice, just to highlight there, the transition phase. The common mistake made in training that you see all too often, especially with endurance-based athletes, is that they will keep on elevating the training volume and the average intensity at the same time. And that's typically where things start going wrong, in the phase of overdoing it. Next part you'll see here towards the end is obviously the taper phase, and there's a steady drop of the training load, but more particularly the training volume drops off quite drastically. It's quite interesting to see that your training intensity keeps on going up all the way to the end. And that's the way you get this peak in performance to happen on race day. What I'd like to look at now is just how we look at intensity and what the typical ways of measuring any type of exercise intensity are. And there's a few conflicting reports in that. And what we need to look at is two concepts really, and the sports science fraternity has termed them internal load versus external load. What does that actually mean? Let me give you some examples of what internal load are. Internal load can also be viewed as a cost. What is it costing you to do the exercise? And that is typically measured either by a heart rate, a rate of perceived exertion, for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard was that session for you? Or if you have the ability and obviously the equipment, you can also measure blood lactate, which will give you an indication of how hard or what the internal cost is. Opposed to the internal load, we have something we call external load, the work. What is the work that you're actually able to do? And what is this work costing you? So one always has to look at both hand in hand. For example, if we look at running's probably a very easy example to sort of explain what I'm talking about. On the one side, you have the measure of heart rate, which is a measure of what is it costing you to run a specific pace. Or on the bike, what is it costing you to deliver a certain amount of power? What will it cost you to deliver 200 watts? And then obviously in team sports, we have acceleration as well that we can use as a measure of external load. And there's always been this concept of heart rate versus power, the heart rate monitor versus the power meter. And it's actually not a contest. They go hand in hand. One shows you what is costing you to deliver the work, and the other is showing you, the power meter on the right-hand side is showing you what you are able to deliver work-wise. So always bear that in mind, and heart rate is still the most convenient way and accurate way to measure what it is costing you internally to do the work. So once we've got that concept clear, we can now look at intensity zones that are based on heart rate. You obviously have zones for power as well as a cyclist, but I'm going to look at specifically the training zones for heart rate. And you'll see we have four different zones here, different colors. Colors are nice to work with. And I'll show you later on in the training planner how you can work out your training zones for yourself based on certain numbers, being max heart rate and resting heart rate. So the heart rate zones are really just a continuum, and they look at different training effects or different benefits that you would get from training at a certain intensity level. And they move from one to the other. So they're not distinct zones. As I said, they are largely a continuum. And as you build them up, you need to lay the foundation at the bottom in the aerobic endurance zone, which is typically 50 to 70% of max intensity. And above that, you have the aerobic stamina zone at 70 to 80%. The yellow zone on top, where things start getting quite hard and uncomfortable, is a lactate tolerance zone. Some people might term it an anaerobic target zone. It's debatable whether the body is truly anaerobic at any stage, but we feel that the lactate tolerance term for this zone actually describes quite well what you are trying to achieve by training at these intensity levels. And then right at the top, you have a maximum zone. Now, very debatable how much benefit most of us would get by training at such high intensities, specifically for endurance-based sports. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. You guys can see the various benefits on the right-hand side that you typically get from each of these heart rate zones. But for an event like the Trance, you really don't need to spend too much training time at these really high intensities. The focus areas are largely the aerobic endurance zone and the aerobic stamina zone, with very little work done at the lactate tolerance zone, if any. If you can choose not to, and you'll still have a very successful day. Just to illustrate that point, the next slide actually shows a curve from someone that has done the Trance over 10 hours. So 10-hour finisher, heart rate curve in red, that dreaded altitude or route profile on the bottom in gray. You'll see all the nice climbs that we went through in episode 1. But what I want to show you here is the amount of time spent in each of the heart rate zones throughout this race. And I think this is quite a good curve, first of all, to show that this rider probably went a little bit too hard in the beginning, burnt a few matches too early, and the steady decline in heart rate throughout the race shows that not a bad race result, but that possibly a little bit slower, a little bit lower intensity initially may have got a flatter heart rate curve and potentially a slightly faster race time. But what I want to show you is a rider of a 10-hour finish has spent most of the time in both the aerobic endurance zone and the aerobic stamina zone, so 50 to 70%, and then 70 to 80%. The lactate tolerance component, you have about 2 hours, was largely dealt with in the beginning of the race, possibly some race tactics playing a role there. But here you can see that the focus in most of your training should largely be in the lower target zones. So from here, we're going to step up to the training planner. Some of you might have downloaded it already. And if you just give me the chance to swap over to a new screen. And you should all see an example of the 12-week training planner up on your screen now. And as Zane said, it's quite a simple Excel spreadsheet, just to explain it briefly, and then Zane will become my guinea pig for the planner. But you'll see you just pop in the race date. And what the planner is really based on is a decision that you need to make under point number 2 here. I hope you can all see that. How much time do you actually have to train in a week? And this is a very realistic, or needs to be a very realistic decision. Check with your family, your partners, your other commitments, your work commitments, because if you compromise in any of those areas, at the end of the day, you're only one person and your training will suffer as well. So be realistic about it. So Zane, to ask you, as a father of now 3, and
excuse me coughing, yeah.
a lot of other commitments, as I understand. What realistically for you, how much time could you afford to train in a week? That would be your maximum week, that you would really not go any further than that.
The commitments at the moment between the kids and mowing the lawn in time is quite drastic. But yeah, I think, to be really realistic with what's going on and being full-time with everything, I don't see me training in an optimum week more than 10 hours. I really don't see that happening. So yeah, I would sort of slot that in as my target, as my optimal week as a 10-hour ride. And it's more or less what I've always looked at in terms of before doing an event like Trance.
Okay, great. So what I did there is I actually just changed the date for the first planned event, should it happen in August. And just to illustrate Zane's 10-hour week as his maximum week, you'll see here, if I just move over to the planner. So the first thing you'll notice, over 12 weeks, we also have a 16-week version of this planner that I can flick to very briefly. But coming back to the 12-week option, so you can choose how much time you have available before the race. Starts on the 25th of May, so there is a bit of time left. And you'll see his first week, the hours for the week is planned at 7 hours 30. What we've then done in the colored blocks on the right-hand side for each week, we've then looked at the time typically of those 7.5 hours that Zane would try and spend in each of the heart rate zones in his training. So remember, I said right at the beginning, this is a guideline. It's not a recipe for each day of the week. It is a weekly guideline that you try and achieve the objective of the plan throughout the week based on your schedule, your commitments, and the time you have available to train. You'll see as it builds up, it then for the second week, moves on to 8 hours and 15 minutes. And then for the third week, we actually have a recovery week. So we're trying to allow the body to grow stronger through the recovery phase. And then the fourth week builds up again, and all the way up. The week of the 13th of July would then be the peak week for this 12-week planner at 10 hours. And that 10 hours would be split up between 7 hours at 50 to 70%, an hour 48 to 70 to 80, and an hour and 12 minutes at 80 to 90%. So that is typically the guideline for the week. And the other thing you'll see here in gray is what we call the LSD session, the long slow distance session. So we also give you a recommendation of your long slow ride, which is predominantly in the lower heart rate zone, aerobic endurance. And for your peak week, that would be at least 3 hours and 20 minutes. It could be more, but it should not be less. So that's always generally a guideline. 1/3 of your total weekly training time would be your long slow distance session. Okay. So this is the planner here. As I said, there's a 16-week option as well if you have a bit more time. I think you'll see there that date is really passed already. But I've found that a 12-week planner actually works quite well. 16 weeks is a 4-month period, quite a long time to focus. For most of us, I think 12 weeks is a really good, achievable chunk of time to focus for an event. And yeah, in total, over those 12 weeks, Zane will be looking at something about in the region of 88.5 hours of training. And the whole idea with this plan, it's a consistent approach. It's a graded approach. We don't increase from 1 week to the next by more than 10% because your body doesn't appreciate drastic changes like that. So these are the basic guidelines that we can give you for looking at your training for an event like this or any endurance-based events that you are doing. The other thing we need to look at is obviously your heart rate zone. So in the planner itself, you have a target zone calculator to help you out with that. And just to cover a few things here, Zane, if I may, how old are you?
34.
Okay. He's a youngster. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't share that was my age in the block there, but so the first thing you'll notice here, maximum heart rate is one number we use to calculate target zones. And we also prefer to use the resting heart rate in the target zone calculation. And you'll see just now, I'll give you some examples why that has an impact. Because remember, these numbers are unique to you as an individual. But first, let's have a look at max heart rate. And there are some estimation equations in the top end of the screen here by putting your age in. We're all very familiar with an estimation equation of 220 minus your age, but I think most of us understand it's possibly not the most accurate way to do it. And the other thing one needs to understand is that your maximum heart rate does potentially vary between sports. So typically for most of us, our highest heart rate would be achieved in a sport like running because it is weight bearing. You are vertical, and that's typically where it get your highest max heart rate. In cycling, because it's not weight bearing and you're using different muscle groups, the muscles you recruit in different sports also has an impact on your max heart rate. We will term that a peak heart rate. So your maximum heart rate would be the highest you can achieve in any sport, but in cycling, you might have a peak heart rate that is slightly lower. So there's an option to go out and we actually recommend it rather than using an estimation equation to actually go out and do a max heart rate test, which is really just a good warm-up of 15 to 30 minutes, and then an all-out effort for 2 minutes as hard as you can go, a 2-minute rest, and another all-out effort for 2 minutes. And you record the highest number, You take that number and you add 5 beats to the number that you record, and you use that as your maximum heart rate. And the last thing to highlight about max heart rate is genetics. Your parents pretty much have a role to play when your max heart rate is determined. You know, it's a genetic thing. And it doesn't mean that you will be the better athlete the higher your max heart rate is. The better athlete is the one that obviously rides or runs or whatever the case might be faster at 80% intensity, for example. But coming back to the target zone calculator, so we put Zane's age in at 34. I would estimate a max heart rate of around 188. Zane, have you ever seen it higher in training at all?
Yeah, I've hit 190 before. So yeah, I always work that as my absolute max at 190.
Okay, so what we would do then is obviously we'd put 190 into the target zone calculator, a little bit lower in here. The next value we look at is a resting heart rate value, which you can typically measure in the morning when you wake up. And we put that number in. Zane, any idea what your resting heart rate might be? Or kids keeping you too busy to measure that?
Yeah, I don't always measure it, but I think I'm around 58 as a resting 58, 55. Yeah.
Okay, so I put Zane's numbers in there. So his heart rate zones have come up at the bottom here. So his aerobic endurance zone would range from 124 to 150. His aerobic stamina zone from 150 to 164. And then 164 to 177 for his lactate tolerance zone. As I said, he can expect a race of the lengths of trance. You know, you're looking at, for most of us, in the region of 12, 14 hours, that a lot of the riding and will be done in the blue and green zones. And that's where your training focus should be as well. And even I could hesitate to guess if I said to Zane, I want you to do all your training below 150 beats per minute, and provided he is disciplined enough to do that, you will actually have a really good race, because you're really just stimulating aerobic economy, aerobic efficiency, and you'll have a really good race, even at the lower end. It's hard to get your mind around that, and you think, I have to train at these higher zones to get fitter and stronger. But for an endurance-based event, and for most events out there, you can be pretty sure that you will get and achieve a lot of your objectives by training at the lower end. The other thing to bear in mind, obviously, in our current situation that we are now, is training is a stress on the body. It's largely a good stress, but it does accumulate with all the other stresses that you might be experiencing currently, and that all of us are experiencing. So just take that into account. And the reason I highlight that is because possibly a lot of us have spent time on indoor trainers, indoor applications, training, and probably gone quite hard because there's lots of race simulations. And just be aware that that is quite a bit of stress on the body. Give yourself enough time to recover, and really look at how much time you spent in the higher zones throughout the week, and make sure that there is enough focus placed on the lower intensity zones as well. So in a nutshell, that is really the trainer. You have the option of just checking your target zones. But before we leave the page, I just want to illustrate the example of why we prefer to use resting heart rate in this calculation. If I were to change Zane's resting heart rate to the extreme, which is 0, just to illustrate the example, you'll notice how the heart rate zones change. So pay attention to the bottom values here, 124 to 137. Once we change them, you'll see drastically now from 124, his 50% value has dropped to 95. So this is another way of indicating heart rate zones. It's just a direct percentage of max heart rate, not considering your resting heart rate. I do believe including the resting heart rate in the calculations makes it more personal and more individual. And the last thing to add, obviously, is that as you get fitter, your resting heart rate does change. Whereas your maximum heart rate generally does not change through fitness. So that's a static number, provided you have either estimated it or tested it correctly. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to, give me a second just to change screens again.
Harold, while you're doing that, I might just bring up a quick question that came through. You mentioned about the caution riders have to take training on indoor trainers at this point in all of our lives. We got a question from Dan Marlin van Hemert. Harold, your thoughts, comments on using indoor trainers and outside training, especially with the lockdown regulations in place? So I think you've answered that to a certain extent already. Do you just want to elaborate a bit more on that before we go further on the presentation?
Sure, no problem. Indoor trainers are a great tool. I think, however, they should be used together with whatever you're doing outside. I noticed, I can give you my personal example. I alternated between a static indoor trainer and I don't know how many people remember classic rollers where you have to balance the bike on the rollers. And one of the main reasons for doing that is obviously just to recruit the balancing component of riding. I have seen, and a few of my friends have actually commented, once they went out on the road after the initial lockdown period, it was quite strange for them and the balance wasn't quite what it was before. So that is one aspect, but I think indoor trainers are great when you're doing specific interval, possibly slightly high intensity type training. But I think there's a distinct balance that is needed for the outdoor side of things. I had a question recently from one of our athletes that really wants to try and get in that 4-hour session. And we all know that's currently not possible. Hopefully that'll change tonight. And I said to them, well, you can do a few options. You can actually go out for the 3 hours, do the 3-hour ride, and then possibly come back and sit for another hour on the trainer, or even put in another session in the afternoon for another hour or so to accumulate that 4-hour period, but pay close attention to the intensity. So yeah, indoor trainers definitely have their place. The only concern I'm really highlighting is make sure you look at the big picture and that the intensity is not always at those really high intensity levels all the time because you're racing all your mates on these virtual platforms.
Great, thanks for answering that, Harold. I think that gives Dan an in-depth answer on his question. I hope you're happy with that, Dan. Harold, you can carry on with your presentation.
Just a few more slides, actually just 2 more on the topic, just a few guidelines on planning your week. Obviously, I've given you an outline with the planner of what the hours you're aiming for, how much time you'd like to spend in each of the target zones, your long, slow distance ride. Just a few guidelines here, and you'll see I've highlighted frequency before. It's probably one of the most important training components is to get the consistency right. Train less more often. What we mean by that is, you know, spread your training loads throughout the week. 6 days a week with 1 rest day is the try and get in at least some sessions throughout the week. Next part to focus on are those hours per week. So I've already highlighted the long, slow distance workout and spreading this workload throughout the week. And the last component really to focus on is to get the intensity right. So if you look at this plan, it possibly seems a little bit overwhelming. And this is sort of the hierarchy that I'd encourage you to focus on. First, get the number of sessions in a week, the 6 sessions per week. Focus on the hours per week. When in doubt, go and do low intensity sessions. And on the intensity side, you know, how we split it up for the week, that's possibly the third thing to focus on. So rather favor the low intensity sessions. As I said earlier, if I kept saying for the 12-week planner under 150 beats per minute, I think he would actually perform relatively well if we did allow him to ride his own race, which we won't. Okay, so just to finish off, some critical success factors, and this is really just part of the focus on frequency, as I've said before. Consistency, it's the only currency that matters at the moment. And this is actually a quote I took from one of the financial companies out there. I'm sure you guys have come across this before. Cannot emphasize this enough, is really just to be consistent. Rather do shorter sessions if you don't feel like the planned session of 2 or 3 hours, get in half an hour, 45 minutes, it also does contribute to the big picture. As I've already highlighted, make sure the intensity, don't have those heroic efforts that we've seen during this period. 1 or 2, not a bad idea, but consistently having these really high intensity efforts does not contribute to the big picture in the long run. And then lastly, a part that's possibly the fourth key to training, as we always term it, is get enough sleep. I think one of the positives, if you want to call it a positive, in this whole last couple of weeks has been the ability for most of us to actually focus on our sleep habits and making sure that we get in our 7 to 9 hours, which is the recommendation. And this is one thing that you can apply straight away, and it's going to make a huge difference in any type of training that you are doing, because it just aids recovery. It contributes to so many factors at the end of the day. Okay, so that's part of the that's part of the presentation for tonight on the training plans. Obviously, you are welcome to send us your questions. If we don't get to all of them right now, then obviously we will address them separately and get you those answers if we do know them.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Harold. I think maybe if you could stop sharing your screen there, then we can go a bit bigger on the screen and look at a few of those questions that have come through. I think the training planner, the indoor trainer was the main question at this point in time. We have posted the links to the training planners. Some of you have been asking. They are available on Excel on that link where you can go and download them and get them and work with them. And yeah, you're welcome to send us questions on that. I see that Mornay Michael Skuman has asked, please check age 43 and 47. Mornay, if you download that spreadsheet, punch those numbers in and see what it does, and give us a shout if you're struggling with that at all. I think that I didn't do it at the start, and obviously every episode we have every week, we have the same question pop up in the feeds. And that is the whole COVID-19 thing, and what is on top of all of our minds at the moment, understandably so. As Transpavians, we have taken and made the statement that we will make a final call as to the event taking place this year in August by 1 June. At the end of this month, we will make an announcement as to what our plans are and whether we will postpone the event. So Charlie Lowe, I see your comment there, and I hope that answers your question. It's just we've made that decision. Hopefully within a couple of minutes we'll get some interesting news from Mr. Ramaphosa as to what our future looks like. But we don't have any secret recipe knowing anything else than the majority of all of us out there. All right, then, Harold, I've got a question from Hendrik Trout. How do you know your body needs rest and you're not just lazy? I like that question. It's a question I normally ask myself when my alarm goes off at 5 a.m. Am I tired, or am I just lazy and don't want to get up and go and train? So I think that's a valid question, Hendrik. Harold, do you want to go for that?
Yeah, Zane, I saw my internet connection was a bit up and down there for a second, so I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, that is a difficult, well, not difficult to answer, but obviously there are a number of things, a number of the products out there, ours included, have recovery calculations that work throughout the night on various recovery parameters to then tell you the next morning, have you recovered from the session the day before, or even the sessions that you've had in the week leading up. So resting heart rate can be used. The more popular one these days is heart rate variability. It's possibly a lot more sensitive in its measurement to give you an indication throughout if you have recovered or not. One of the things I always say is you as you wake up, you might not feel like your session. go out and do 10, 15, possibly 20 minutes, and if you're still not feeling great and you still have doubts, then possibly it's a good idea to turn around and go back home. One of the things about heart rate that you can see very quickly is because heart rate is largely determined by, or predominantly, should I say, determined by energy demand and oxygen demand. If you have a fatigued muscle, it simply cannot demand the energy and oxygen, and therefore the heart rate won't go up. So you think perception wise, I'm working quite hard here, but my heart rate's not responding. That's normally a good sign of fatigue. But I would have certain things in place. On the running side, are you running a similar running speed to before at the same heart rate? But when you're still lying in bed, there's obviously always the debate with yourself. But the new metrics that get measured through sleep are really great, because they do work very well. They are very sensitive. The accuracy is being validated more and more to give you an idea. Have you recovered from sessions? And when your device says, look, you've recovered, you've had a great sleep, there's really no excuse to not get out the door.
Well, that's great. Thanks for answering that, Harold. I think that I'm going to just take from there onto the Polar Grid X competition that we have every week. It's the awesome new product launched by Polar, and we have a competition for you guys that are watching to win those every week, or one of them. You all go into one draw, and there's only a link open during the show, and it will only be open till 8 o'clock. And I think we will post that link right now that you can follow, fill in that form, and stand a chance to win that watch. Next week we'll have another unique link. It's only comes up during the show, and it's a really, really great product. I think on that note, I'm gonna just play a little teaser of that product that's up for grabs for you guys to have an idea what it does. I'm going to share my screen, and righto. That is the new Polar Grid X that is up for grabs. Harold, then we've got another competition from episode 1 that we've announced the one guy that has already won, and that was Tiens Koch with the railway line climb that he named WTF. You've already won that part of the thing. And then earlier today we had a poll running for voting between BAC, baby of all climbs, and the cramp kicker for that first little hill at 103 Ks into the race. And it's one that nails everybody every time, and it always tests you. And it looks like just before the show started, I checked the poll again, and we were very neck on neck on it. And so it seems that both are liked, but I think that the BAC was about 53% leading to a 47% on the cramp kicker. So the BAC will be the new name for that little kicker just after Gillard Bos, and the man that named that was Jandre Prinsloo from the first episode of the Trans Talk live stream. So Harold, Polar has given the go-ahead for a very nifty little prize for those two men. Harold, do you want to share what they will be receiving shortly?
Yeah, thanks, Zane. Just from our side, I think we asked people to name the climb because we felt that these were two hills or climbs. Some people might term them hills. I term them climbs that maybe haven't got a name on the route profile. And the enthusiasm was amazing when we put it out there to get the names out there. And so what we've decided is each one of those, we have probably, I don't want to boast too much, but probably the best heart rate chest transmitter or, out there, and which is the H10, which we'd like to send through to each of the guys that did name the climb. The good thing about the H10 is a few things. Obviously, really good accuracy. We've got a lot of validated research validating this heart rate sensor. It's got a dual electrode concept to minimize any erratic readings, really good skin contact from the electrode belt. But more importantly for most of us on the practical side, 2 simultaneous Bluetooth connections. So you can combine it with your training computer on your wrist, your bike computer if you want to, if you're a triathlete, for example, or your favorite indoor training app. So it has the 2 Bluetooth connections. And then obviously if you have other type of bike computer that you might want to use, you have an ANT+ connection as well. And then the slightly older, in inverted commas, 5 kilohertz connection, which works with most gym equipment, and a really good battery life. So well done to those guys for naming that. Hopefully we can get these units through to you soon that you can then pair up with virtually anything you want to. I think the last point just to highlight is the heart rate, or the chest-based heart rate sensor, is still the preferred solution for cycling. Optical heart rate is out there, been out there for quite a few years. It's found in most products, but it's not always the greatest thing for, possibly not the most reliable way of measuring heart rate on the bike because of the added wrist tension that you typically have when you're holding the handlebars. So congratulations to those guys again, and thanks for thanks to everyone for participating, and let's hopefully we can get the route profile slightly amended with those new names and make them famous.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harold, and you guys from Polar for bringing that prize to the party for those 2 gentlemen that named those climbs. And yeah, thank you for everybody participating on those hills. Yeah, we will get the graphic guys on definitely on amending our route profile and putting those names in there and on the stickers on your frame and everything as well. I've just seen a comment come up that the president's about to talk. So I think we will leave you with a nice little video clip of Bergplaats, the climbs of that beautiful area that you ride through, and to give you a bit of a teaser and a motivation to train for the race, even within our regulations and everything that happens. And whenever the race takes place, we can guarantee you that Transbaviaans will continue for another 16 years. After this last year was its 16th edition. We are committed to continuing with this race, and it will, even if it needs to be postponed. So yeah, enjoy our little video from Bergplaats, and hopefully Mr. President is sharing some good news with us. Harold, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Zane. Appreciate it.
climb is that it's Mac, all right. No, it's a sting in the tail after all the lack of fun we had from the beginning, and now it's reality time, yeah.
At least we're hitting Bergplaats in light with beautiful sun setting at the back there. It's some dark, ominous clouds in the background, but we're looking forward to a lucky evening. See you on the other side.
It was fantastic until Mac. It really was, yeah, then everything fell to pieces.
Ons nou net agter aan die huis toe. Hulle sê dis die kas hier. Die kas se deure is nou oop. So ons gaan maak op oop huis toe nou.
There's a bit of pain involved. That I can promise you.
It's been a drag, but it's been awesome. 140 k's done. Now it's going downhill all the way into the beach.
It's the Big Dipper. They need their brakes and their lights going down here. And I'm sure they're all looking forward to some nice downhill. It's rutted going down, and there's some sure drop-offs, but at least the sun's setting and they won't see how far they can fall.